A bright Idaho winter welcomed Gideon Rourke home, with his retired canine Bishop beside him. He wanted only a quiet workshop, an old house, and a life no longer ruled by duty. Then Bishop vanished before sunrise, and Gideon found him bleeding in the snow, his leg destroyed by a hidden trap. The town called it an accident, while the people connected to Northridge urged Gideon to stop asking questions. But behind its clean fences, German shepherds without names were being broken, renamed, and sold for profit. To save them, Gideon would have to face not only one powerful man, but an entire town that had learned to look away. Tell us where you're watching from, share your thoughts, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep these stories coming. Winter had made Timberline Crossing look more innocent than it was. Fresh snow rested on the roofs in clean white layers, smoothing over rusted gutters, sagging porches, and the patched shingles of houses that had survived too many hard seasons. Sunlight poured through a cloudless Idaho sky and struck the roads until they shone like pale glass. Beyond town, pine-covered mountains rose in blue and white folds, their shadows long across the valley. From a distance, it looked like the sort of place a man might return to and begin again. Gideon Rourke knew better than to trust distance. He drove slowly along Main Street in his father's old pickup, one hand resting low on the wheel. The truck had been stored for years beneath a canvas shelter behind the family workshop. Its heater rattled, the steering pulled slightly to the right, and cold air crept through the seals around the doors. Beside him, Bishop sat upright on the passenger seat. The 8-year-old German shepherd had a black muzzle, a narrow saddle of dark fur along his spine, and a deep honey gold coat that brightened whenever sunlight crossed the cab. A pale crescent of fur marked the left side of his throat. The tip of his left ear curved outward, giving him a permanently questioning expression. Bishop watched the town through the windshield without excitement. He had spent years searching roadsides, culverts, damaged buildings, and work sites for things men had hidden with the intention of killing strangers. New places did not impress him. He inspected them. "You can stop evaluating the hardware store," Gideon said. Bishop's ears remained forward. "Pretty sure it has passed inspection." The dog glanced at him once, then returned his attention to the street. Gideon almost smiled. At 52, he had the broad shoulders of a man who had spent most of his life lifting more than he should. 3 decades with Army engineering units had thickened his hands and left a slight forward slope in his posture. His nose bent subtly to the left from an old break. Brown hair, now ash-gray at the temples, had grown longer than regulations would once have allowed, and fell toward his forehead beneath a charcoal knit cap. The reflection in the windshield showed a face Timberline Crossing would recognize and misremember at the same time. He passed the diner where he had once thrown a chair through a window after losing a fight. The glass had been replaced decades ago, but he still remembered the sound it made. Across the street stood the old pharmacy. The owner had changed, the sign had changed, and the narrow alley beside it seemed much smaller than the place where Gideon had once hidden from a deputy after racing a truck through town. A man clearing snow from the sidewalk looked up as the pickup passed. Recognition came slowly, then settled hard across his face. Gideon lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel. The man did not return the gesture. "That went well," Gideon murmured. Bishop breathed against the glass. The Army had taught Gideon how to cross rivers under fire, stabilize collapsed structures, clear explosives from roads, and sleep beside machinery loud enough to shake dust from his teeth. It had not taught him how to drive past people who remembered the worst version of him and had no reason to believe another version existed. He had returned to Timberline Crossing only a handful of times over the years. Once for his mother's funeral, again when his father's lungs had failed, twice to sign documents, empty rooms, and place things into boxes he never opened afterward. Each visit had lasted only long enough to complete a duty. He had never gone to see Wesley Dunn. That absence sat in town more permanently than Gideon ever had. Swedish had been 21 when Gideon lost control of a truck on a frozen logging road. Gideon had been driving too fast and laughing too loudly, furious at nothing he could name. Wesley had survived, but his right leg never healed correctly. Gideon had enlisted months later. Some people called that discipline. Others called it escape. He had never decided which explanation hurt more. At the far end of town, he turned beside a low brick storefront with a wooden sign that read, "Sloan Leather and Tack." A brass bell above the door gave a tired jingle when he entered. Warm air smelled of leather, wax, coffee, and cedar shavings. Maribel Sloan sat behind a workbench beneath a hanging lamp, pulling thick thread through a saddle strap. At 58, she had square shoulders, strong forearms, and gray-brown hair tied low with a strip of leather. Red-framed glasses rested halfway down her nose. She looked at Gideon for a long moment. Then she looked past him through the window at Bishop waiting in the truck. "You got older," she said. "So did the bell. The bell works."
Debatable.
Maribel set down her needle. "You planning to stand there until spring?" Gideon stepped farther inside. Years earlier, when no one else in town trusted him near anything breakable, Maribel had paid him to sweep floors and oil harnesses. She had never pretended he was misunderstood. She had simply expected him to arrive on time. She walked around the bench and embraced him once, quickly and without ceremony. It was the first welcome he had received. When she released him, her eyes moved over his face as if taking inventory. "You staying?" "That is the plan. You have had plans before. This one comes with property taxes." "That makes it serious." Gideon glanced toward the shelves lined with bridles and leather straps. "I am opening Dad's workshop again. Repairs, heating systems, farm equipment, whatever keeps the lights on." Maribel folded her arms. "And the dog?" "Retired. He know that?" "No." A faint smile touched her mouth. Then it disappeared. "You should know the town is different. I noticed the new bakery. I am not talking about bread." She nodded toward the northern edge of the valley. "Northridge Working Dogs employs nearly 40 people now. More during training season. They pay local transport, local feed suppliers, maintenance crews. Harlan Voss funded half the new snow equipment. I saw the sign coming in." Northridge had placed a blue and white advertisement beside the highway. Discipline, security, trust. Beneath the words stood the painted silhouette of a German shepherd. Maribel picked up her brass-handled shears and tapped them lightly against the table. "People here are grateful to Harlan." That sounds like a warning. It is a fact. Warnings depend on what you decide to do with facts. Gideon studied her. "Is there something I should know?" Maribel's gaze moved toward the front window. A dark delivery van passed outside, its side marked with the Northridge emblem. The driver did not look toward the shop. "Only that this town has learned not to ask questions that might cost someone a paycheck." The sentence remained between them. Gideon could have asked more. Instead, Bishop barked once from the truck, not alarm, impatience. Maribel looked toward him. "Smart dog." "Usually." "Then listen when he tells you not to waste the daylight." The Rourke property lay 3 miles outside town, beside a frozen lake bordered by pine and alder. The house was smaller than Gideon remembered, the workshop larger. Snow had buried the lower fence rails and drifted against the shed doors. Bishop stepped from the truck and stood still for several seconds, nose raised. No command was needed. He moved across the yard, checking the porch, woodpile, workshop doors, and tree line. His pace was measured. His right shoulder occasionally tightened from the old injury that had ended his service. Gideon carried boxes inside. The house smelled of dust, cold stone, and the faint machine oil scent that had followed his father everywhere. He found an old wooden folding ruler on the workbench, one edge burned dark from a welding accident years ago. He opened it halfway. The joints clicked into place. For a moment he was 17 again, watching his father measure a broken gate while refusing to discuss the deputy's car Gideon had dented the night before. "You can build a straight thing with crooked hands," his father had once said, "but you have to measure twice." Gideon folded the ruler and placed it in his coat pocket. That evening, he repaired one section of fence while Bishop followed the perimeter. The sunlight remained bright until late afternoon, turning the snow gold beneath the trees. Across the lake, smoke rose from distant chimneys in thin blue lines. It was almost peaceful. Then an enclosed truck appeared on the forest road beyond the far shore. It was white, without markings. It moved slowly between the pines, too large for a private vehicle and too quiet for a logging truck. Narrow ventilation slats ran along the upper panels. Bishop stopped. His body went still. The truck disappeared behind the trees, heading toward the northern access road. Toward Northridge. Gideon rested both hands on the fence post. A minute later, Bishop returned to him and pressed his right shoulder against Gideon's leg. "You saw it too," Gideon said. The dog looked back toward the woods. Gideon could have driven after it. The old version of him would have. Instead, he pushed the fence post into alignment and returned to work. He had come home to stop living as though every unusual sound was his responsibility. He had no badge, no orders, and no intention of becoming the town's latest problem. By nightfall, the house had warmed. Gideon ate canned soup while Bishop lay near the back door, ears moving whenever the heating pipes clicked. Before sleeping, the dog completed one final circuit of the property. Gideon watched through the kitchen window as Bishop crossed the moonlit snow, pausing beside the workshop and then near the lower fence. The habit had survived retirement because vigilance was easier to teach than rest. "Last patrol," Gideon called softly. Bishop looked toward him, then continued. Gideon left the porch light on. He woke before sunrise. At first, he did not know what had disturbed him. The bedroom was cold and pale. The furnace hummed below. Wind brushed snow from the roof in a soft hiss. Then he understood. There were no claws on the porch boards. No movement near the back door. No slow breathing from Bishop's blanket. Gideon was out of bed before the fear had fully formed. The back door stood partly open. Snow had blown across the threshold. "Bishop!" No answer. He pulled on boots and his canvas coat, then stepped into the blue light before dawn. Tracks crossed the yard toward the lower hill. Bishop's prints were clear at first, evenly spaced. Halfway to the tree line, they changed. One paw dragged. Then Gideon saw blood. Not much. A narrow red mark across untouched snow. He followed it downhill, calling Bishop's name only once more because something in him already knew the dog was close and silence might matter. At the edge of the pines, Bishop lay on his side. His rear leg was trapped in a steel cable mechanism hidden beneath broken branches. The cable had tightened above the hock and twisted as he struggled. Snow around him had been torn into dark earth and blood. Bishop lifted his head. He did not cry out. That restraint nearly broke Gideon more than any sound could have. "I am here." Gideon dropped beside him. His hands moved automatically, finding the release, assessing the cable, checking blood flow. But the damage beneath the fur was wrong. The lower leg bent at an angle no living bone should hold. Bishop's eyes remained fixed on him, trusting him to solve what could not be undone. "Easy," Gideon whispered. "Do not help me. Just stay." He took the wooden ruler from his coat pocket and used its metal edge to hold tension away from the release catch. His fingers slipped once. He forced them steady. The mechanism opened. Bishop tried to rise and collapsed. Gideon caught him beneath the chest. Only then did he notice the strip of red leather half buried beside the trap. It had been torn from a tool strap or glove, the edge freshly ripped. Beyond it, 2 narrow tire tracks cut across the snow and disappeared toward the forest road. The same road that led north. Gideon gathered Bishop into his arms. The dog was heavy, warmer than the snow, and trembling so hard Gideon felt it through both their bodies. As he climbed toward the house, he looked once over his shoulder at the tracks. Someone had placed the trap beneath fresh branches. Someone had known Bishop walked this route every night. Timberline Crossing had remembered Gideon as a reckless young man capable of causing harm without thinking. But this had not been reckless. This had been measured. On barn coat over a gray-blue scrub shirt. She was 64, narrow through the shoulders, with silver hair cut bluntly at her jaw, and a face that seemed built for withholding false comfort. Reading glasses hung from a thin cord against her chest. She took one look through the truck window and stopped asking questions. "Bring him through the side entrance." Gideon lifted Bishop carefully. The German shepherd made no sound, but his breathing came shallow and fast against Gideon's neck. Lenora walked ahead, opening doors and moving equipment out of the way. Inside the treatment room, warmth met them too quickly. The smell of antiseptic, wet fur, and heated rubber filled the air. Gideon lowered Bishop onto a padded steel table, while Lenora cut away fur around the trapped leg. The damage looked worse beneath the blood. The cable had crushed tissue above the hock and twisted the lower limb until the joint no longer held its proper shape. The paw had gone cold. Lenora examined the gums, checked the pulse at the inner thigh, and pressed a stethoscope to Bishop's ribs. Her movements were quick, but never hurried. How long was he trapped? I do not know. How long between finding him and arriving here? 23 minutes. You timed it? I looked at the dashboard. Lenora glanced at him once. Any blood loss before you released the cable? Not much until the pressure came off. Good. That helped. The word good had no business in the room, but Gideon understood what she meant. Lenora injected medication through a line in Bishop's front leg. His eyes followed Gideon until the sedative began to pull them closed. We need radiographs, she said. Then surgery. You can save it? Lenora did not answer immediately. That silence was the answer. Gideon placed a hand beside Bishop's head. His thumb rested near the pale crescent of fur under the dog's throat. Tell me plainly. The blood supply has been compromised too long. The bones are shattered in more than one place. Even if I reconstructed the limb, infection and tissue death would remain serious risks. Gideon looked at the rear leg, as though correct attention might force it back into order. Lenora continued, quieter now. I can save Bishop. I cannot save that leg. The room narrowed around the sentence. Gideon had spent years understanding damage in measurements, load limits, blast radius, structural failure, time to collapse. Facts became useful when they could be converted into action. There was no useful conversion for this. He worked beside me for 6 years, Gideon said. I know. He never left a man behind. Lenora's expression did not soften, but her voice did. Then do not ask him to lose the rest of his life, trying to keep a limb that is already gone. Gideon closed his eyes. When he opened them, Bishop was unconscious. Do it. The surgery lasted 3 hours and 46 minutes. Gideon knew because Lenora's old mechanical stopwatch sat on the reception desk, its silver case catching the overhead light each time he looked up. He waited on the floor beside an empty recovery run because the chairs felt too far from the surgery room. Snowmelt darkened the knees of his jeans. Blood had dried in the seams of his hands. A veterinary technician brought him coffee. He held it until it cooled and never drank. At some point, a delivery driver entered with a box of medical supplies. The man recognized Gideon, looked at the blood on his coat, and found a reason to leave quickly. Gideon barely noticed. Memory did not come to him as a heroic montage. It came in unremarkable fragments. Bishop asleep under a portable work table during a sandstorm. Bishop nudging Gideon's hand away from a loose wire near a damaged culvert. Bishop refusing to enter a transport carrier until Gideon climbed in first.
Once, overseas, an explosion had thrown Gideon into a drainage channel and filled his mouth with dirt. Bishop had found him before the rest of the team, planted both front paws beside his ribs, and barked until someone came. Gideon had thanked him later with half a ration pouch and a scratched ear. It had seemed sufficient at the time. The surgery room door opened shortly after noon. Lenora removed her gloves as she approached. Fatigue had tightened the lines around her mouth. He is alive. His temperature is stable. The amputation is high enough to preserve good muscle coverage and low enough that a prosthetic may eventually be possible. Eventually. A word built for people who still believed time was generous. Can I see him? In a few minutes. He will be disoriented. Gideon stood and the room tilted slightly. Lenora caught his elbow. You need food. I need to see him. You need both. Bishop first. She released him with a displeased breath. That answer is why men like you become medical problems.
Bishop woke near evening. For several seconds he lay motionless beneath a gray blanket. Then his eyes opened and moved around the recovery room until they found Gideon. Gideon sat on the floor outside the open run. Hey. Bishop lifted his head. His body followed the old expectation before his mind understood the change. He planted his front paws, shifted his weight, and tried to stand. The missing rear leg reached for the floor. Nothing met it. Bishop fell hard against the padded wall. A sound came from him then, not a cry of pain, but a low, furious growl directed at the empty space where part of his body should have been. Gideon moved forward. Bishop bared his teeth, not at Gideon, at help. Gideon stopped. The dog tried again. His front legs shook. The remaining rear paw slid on the blanket and he collapsed a second time. He twisted toward the bandaged stump, confused by the absence and angered by his inability to correct it. Easy, Gideon said. Bishop turned his face toward the wall. The rejection landed more sharply than Gideon expected. Lenora stood behind him, arms folded. Do not make this about whether he still trusts you. Gideon looked back at her. What else would it be? He trusts you enough to be angry where you can see it. Bishop remained facing the wall. Lenora crouched beside Gideon, careful not to enter the run. He has lost balance, reach, habit, and the map his brain used to understand his own body. He will have to build another map. That takes time. He does not know how to fail. Then he is about to learn. Gideon's jaw tightened. Lenora met his gaze without apology. So are you. The next morning, Gideon carried the trap into the sheriff's office, inside a plastic storage bin. The building occupied the former county tax office, a one-story structure with beige walls and fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired. A framed photograph of Harlan Voss shaking hands with the sheriff hung near the entrance beside a plaque thanking Northridge Working Dogs for supporting winter emergency services. Deputy Sheriff Emmett Crowley met Gideon in a narrow interview room. Emmett was 47, broad through the middle with thinning sandy hair and a tired face that might once have looked friendly. He wore his uniform neatly, though one shirt cuff had begun to fray. He placed a legal pad on the table and looked at the trap through the clear lid. You touched it? I had to release the dog. After that, I used gloves. You moved it from the scene. I was not leaving it there. Emmett sighed as though Gideon had already made the morning difficult. He took the statement, noted the time, the location, the tire tracks, and the red strip of leather. When Gideon mentioned Northridge, Emmett's pen stopped. What connects this to Harlan's operation? The road. Several properties use that road. The enclosed truck I saw the evening before. You have a plate? No. A logo? No. Then you saw a truck. Gideon leaned back slowly. The trap was hidden on Bishop's routine path. Or someone was trapping coyotes and did a poor job. It was placed inside my boundary fence. That made Emmett pause. Fence intact? Lower wire had been cut and twisted back. Did you photograph it? Yes. Gideon slid his phone across the table. Emmett examined the images. His face changed slightly, not enough to become concern, but enough to prove he understood the difference between carelessness and entry. Still, when he began filling out the classification line, he wrote, "Suspected illegal trapping." Put Northridge in the report. I will put down what is supported. The leather matches equipment used there. Red leather matches half the work gloves in the county. You already decided what happened. No, Gideon, I am preventing you from deciding before evidence does. The use of his first name carried an old familiarity Gideon did not welcome. Emmett closed the storage bin. I remember how you handled being angry. I was 21, and Wesley still walks with a cane. The words were not shouted. That made them worse. Gideon placed both hands flat on the table. I am not asking you to forget what I did. Good. I am asking you to investigate what someone did to Bishop. I am taking the trap. I am filing the report. But you stay away from Northridge unless you have lawful business there. You do not threaten Harlan Voss, follow his trucks, or turn this into one of your old crusades. I never had crusades. You had wreckage. For one breath, Gideon saw the interview room from far away. The beige wall, Emmett's pen, the photograph outside, the trap between them. Then he stood. Send it for examination. I will process it. That is not what I said. Emmett's mouth tightened. Go take care of your dog. By afternoon, the story had outrun the report. At the diner, someone said Gideon had accused Northridge because Harlan refused to hire him. At the gas station, the version became that Bishop had attacked livestock and been caught in a legal trap. By evening, a man Gideon barely remembered posted online that some people returned home wearing military service like a shield against accountability. Gideon read none of it. Maribel told him enough. She arrived at the clinic carrying soup, bread, and the practical anger of someone who had already argued with 3 people before lunch. Do not answer rumors, she said. I was not planning to. You are thinking loudly. That is Lenora's diagnosis. Lenora is usually right, which is one of her least pleasant qualities. Bishop lay in the recovery run with his back to them. Gideon sat beside the door until the clinic lights dimmed. Near sunset, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Harlan Voss entered carrying a paper folder and the expression of a man arriving to resolve an unfortunate misunderstanding. He was tall, silver-haired, clean-shaven, and dressed in a navy wool coat that held no trace of snow. His face was open and composed, the kind that appeared naturally trustworthy in newspaper photographs. I heard about Bishop, he said. Terrible thing. Gideon rose but did not offer his hand. Harlan turned to Lenora. I would like Northridge to cover the surgical expenses. We also work with an excellent rehabilitation center in Montana. He opened the folder. Inside was a temporary transfer of care agreement. No, Gideon said. Harlan's smile remained. You should at least review the options. A retired working dog with this level of trauma requires specialized care. He has it. Of course. I mean no disrespect to Dr. Vale. A cluster of metal keys hung from Harlan's belt. When he shifted, they struck one another with a sharp, bright sound. Bishop's head came up. His body pressed backward until his shoulders met the wall of the run. Harlan took one step closer. Bishop did not bark. He stared at the keys, then at the dark leather gloves in Harlan's hand. His nostrils widened. The scent of machine oil drifted faintly through the antiseptic air. Lenora saw the reaction. So did Gideon. Harlan stopped. "Trauma can create unusual associations," he said. "Then do not add to them," Lenora replied. Harlan closed the folder. His courtesy did not disappear. It hardened. "The offer remains open." "It is closed," Gideon said. After the SUV left, Lenora locked the clinic door and stood beside Bishop's run. "I have treated 6 German Shepherds from Northridge in the past 2 years," she said. Gideon looked at her. "One had broken teeth, 2 had torn nails, another had small electrical burns beneath the neck fur. There were restraint injuries, dehydration, damaged paw pads. And you reported it?" "The paperwork described training accidents. Every dog had an owner authorization. Every explanation was just plausible enough to survive if no one placed the cases beside each other." "Did you believe them?" Lenora's eyes dropped to her hands. "I accepted them." Either was not the same answer. It was worse. 2 days later, Gideon carried copies of Bishop's records and the photographs to the county animal control office. Nadine Kessler listened without interrupting. She wore a navy-insulated jacket over a pale shirt, and a cobalt blue notebook lay open before her. At 55, she had a square face, steel-colored eyes, and the stillness of someone who did not confuse sympathy with proof. When Gideon finished, she closed the notebook. "I do not know whether Northridge did this. I know. I do not know whether the trap was intended for Bishop. I know. But I can check whether the circumstances around him belong to a larger pattern." She asked for the veterinary files, the original photographs, names of missing dogs, dates, microchip numbers, and any record of enclosed transport vehicles. No promises, no speeches, just work. Bishop came home at the end of the week. He refused the first support harness. He refused the soft ramp Gideon built beside the porch. He refused food until Gideon sat on the kitchen floor and held the bowl without looking directly at him. When Bishop finally ate, he did so slowly, standing awkwardly on 3 legs, while Gideon remained still beside him. The victory was too small to celebrate and too important to dismiss. That evening, Nadine called. "I checked reports from this county and 2 adjoining ones," she said. 9 German Shepherds missing in 18 months. Different owners, different towns, 1 or 2 at a time. Gideon looked across the room. Bishop had finished eating and was staring at the dark window. No one connected them? Not until now. Outside, snow began falling in thin, bright grains beneath the porch light. Gideon rested his hand on the wooden ruler in his pocket. Bishop had not been the first dog someone had taken an interest in. He was simply the first one who had made it home alive enough to leave a question behind. 3 weeks after Bishop came home from the clinic, Gideon stopped measuring progress by distance. Distance lied. Bishop could cross the kitchen in 6 uneven strides and still spend the next hour exhausted beneath the table. He could stand long enough to drink, then lose his balance turning toward the back door. Some mornings he tolerated the support harness. On others, the sight of it made him retreat to the corner beside the stove. So Gideon measured smaller things. Bishop no longer growled when Gideon touched the bandaged stump. He had begun sleeping with his back exposed, instead of pressed against a wall. Twice he had carried his empty food bowl across the room and dropped it at Gideon's feet with enough irritation to feel familiar. That counted. Work returned more awkwardly. The Rourke workshop had spent years collecting dust, warped boards, and the nests of animals clever enough to understand abandoned property.
Gideon repaired the roof first, then the fuse box, then the old furnace that coughed black smoke whenever it was asked to behave. He had just finished replacing a cracked belt on a snowblower when Maribel arrived with another man in the passenger seat of her truck. "You look employable," she said as she stepped out. "I was hoping for something kinder." "I brought someone who pays. That is kinder." The man climbing down after her moved with the careful stiffness of someone whose joints had filed complaints over many winters. Curtis Bellamy was 61, compact and broad through the chest, with white hair flattened beneath a green cap and a mustache that curved down around his mouth. His insulated coveralls had been repaired so often that the original fabric seemed to be the minority. He looked at the snowblower, then at Gideon. "You rebuild that carburetor?" "Yes." "Wrong gasket." It was the only one in the drawer. Curtis bent, inspected the engine, and grunted. "You cut it to fit?" "Yes." "Ugly." "It runs." Curtis straightened. "Maribel says you know heating systems." "I know enough to recognize when they are lying." That earned the first hint of approval. Curtis operated Bellamy Mechanical with 2 permanent employees and whatever temporary help winter allowed. One of his technicians had broken a wrist after slipping from a church roof, leaving him short-handed at the worst possible time. He needed someone who could read electrical diagrams, work around boilers, and avoid becoming heroic near high voltage. Maribel pointed at Gideon. "He is disappointing in many ways, but he understands machinery." Curtis studied him again. "You still planning to stay in town?" "That is the plan." "Plans do not turn wrenches." "No. Hands do." Curtis glanced toward the open workshop door where Bishop lay on a folded blanket near the stove. The dog watched him without rising. "I heard what happened." Most people said it with curiosity. Curtis said it like a fact that had weight. Gideon nodded. Curtis did not ask for details. "I have a warehouse heater failing north of town. Cold snap comes tomorrow. You available?" "Where?" Curtis hesitated just long enough. "Northridge?" Maribel's eyes shifted toward Gideon. He looked past Curtis to Bishop. The dog's ears had risen at the name. Gideon could have refused. Nadine had told him to gather facts, not create confrontations. Emmett had already warned him away from the property. Harlan had shown interest in Bishop that felt less like concern each time Gideon remembered it. But Northridge had called a licensed contractor. Gideon would be there lawfully, with witnesses, doing work he understood. "When do we leave?" Northridge working dogs sat 6 miles beyond Timberline Crossing, where the valley narrowed between dark pines and a low, white ridge. The entrance road had been plowed to perfection. Blue signs directed visitors toward administration, training fields, and delivery access. Everything visible had been arranged to reassure. The fences were straight. Snow had been cleared from the walkways. Dogs moved through obedience drills beside handlers in matching navy jackets. The main office windows reflected the mountains and gave away nothing inside. A painted sign near the gate read, "Discipline builds trust." Gideon read it twice. Curtis noticed, "Do not." I did not say anything. "You have a face that says enough." They parked beside a metal warehouse near the eastern fence. A younger technician named Joel carried tools inside, while Curtis signed paperwork with the facility's supervisor. Harlan appeared before they had unloaded the second toolbox. He wore a navy quilted vest over a cream sweater, no coat despite the cold. His silver hair remained perfectly arranged. "Mr. Rourke," he said. "Harlan. I was not aware you worked for Bellamy Mechanical." "Neither was I until yesterday." Harlan's gaze moved toward Curtis, who was pretending to examine a pressure gauge.
I assume Deputy Crowley explained the importance of keeping personal suspicions separate from professional work? Curtis looked up. He is here to repair a heater. Of course, Harlan smiled, but the expression carried no warmth. You will remain in the warehouse and utility corridor. An employee will accompany you. Some sections contain dogs undergoing specialized training, and we cannot risk disruption. Understood, Gideon said. The answer seemed to disappoint him. Inside, the warehouse held stacked food bags, cleaning supplies, folded transport crates, and racks of identical leashes. The heater had failed because a circulation pump had burned out. It was ordinary damage, the kind Gideon could repair without thinking too hard. But the building itself kept interrupting him. The utility meter showed a winter load far above what one warehouse and the visible kennel block should require. 3 heating circuits left the main manifold. 2 matched the current diagram. The third disappeared through the rear wall. Gideon traced it with his eyes. "Where does that line go?" he asked. The employee assigned to watch them was a thick-necked man named Rusk, wearing a Northridge jacket and mirrored safety glasses despite being indoors. "Old storage." "It is drawing heat." "Then it is heated storage." Curtis gave Gideon a look. Work first. They replaced the pump. Gideon recorded the amperage before and after startup, using the same habit he had relied on for military generators. The new reading stabilized, but the unexplained third circuit continued drawing almost as much power as the warehouse itself. When Rusk stepped outside to answer a phone call, Gideon moved toward the back wall. A low ventilation duct ran behind stacked pallets of dog food. Warm air vibrated faintly through the metal. Then came a sound beneath it. One bark, muffled, deep, close enough to feel through the soles of his boots. A second answered from farther away. Not behind the wall, below the floor. Gideon crouched and placed 2 fingers against the ductwork. Warm air moved upward. The flow direction was wrong for storage above ground. Curtis appeared beside him. "Get up." "There is a lower level." "There is no lower level." "That is my point." Curtis's voice dropped. "Get up before Rusk comes back." Gideon remained still. Another sound rose through the duct. Scratching. Then a metal bowl skidding across concrete. Curtis seized Gideon's sleeve and pulled him upright with surprising strength. "Not here." They finished the repair in silence. In the truck, halfway down the entrance road, Curtis pulled onto the shoulder and killed the engine. Snowlight filled the cab. "You think I have not noticed?" he asked. Gideon waited. Curtis removed his cap and rubbed one hand over his thin white hair. "Bills from this place kept my company alive after my wife got sick. They paid early. They gave us summer contracts when nobody else needed heat work. I have 3 employees with mortgages. That does not change the pipe." "No. The registered kennel count does not match the power draw." "I know." "You knew about the line." "I knew something was wrong with the plans. I did not know what was under that floor." "But you chose not to ask." Curtis stared through the windshield. "Yes." The admission had no defense wrapped around it. That made it harder to condemn. "If I lose Northridge," Curtis said, "Bellamy Mechanical closes before spring." Gideon looked at the man's repaired gloves, the cracked dashboard, the invoices stacked behind the seat. He had expected cowardice to look cleaner. "I am not asking you to accuse anyone," Gideon said. "What are you asking?" "Keep your old records." Curtis turned toward him. "Every diagram, every meter reading, every service call, do not destroy anything." Curtis said nothing for several seconds. Then he started the truck. They returned 2 days later when the backup generator began failing under the new cold front. This time Harlan was absent. A woman met them at the transport bay. Tamsin Greer wore a gray-blue work coat, black trousers, and a dark wine-colored knit cap pulled low over uneven black hair streaked with silver. She was tall and narrow, with a guarded face and a left ring finger that did not fully straighten when she signed the work form. Her red leather gloves were worn pale at the knuckles. "Generator is through there," she said. "Do not block the loading lane." Her tone suggested she considered every person an inconvenience until proven otherwise. While Curtis and Joel checked fuel pressure, Gideon inspected the automatic transfer switch. Tamsin remained nearby, watching the yard more than the repair. A dog whined behind a closed isolation door at the far end of the bay. Tamsin looked toward it. No one else did. A few minutes later, she lifted a full water bowl from a shelf, crossed the bay, and disappeared through the door. When she returned, the bowl was empty, and the front of one glove was wet. "The dog assigned there is under restricted handling," Gideon said. Tamsin's eyes hardened. "You repair generators?" "I do." "Then repair one." The generator coughed, caught, and settled into a rough idle. Gideon adjusted the governor. There was a heating circuit beneath the feed warehouse. Her expression did not change, but her wet glove stopped moving. "I would not know." "You coordinate transport." "I coordinate vehicles." "How many dogs are registered on site?" She looked directly at him for the first time. "You ask questions like someone who has forgotten where he is." "No, I know exactly where I am." Tamsin glanced toward Rusk, standing near the outer gate. Then she spoke without moving her lips much. "Some dogs here do not exist on paper." The words were nearly swallowed by the engine. Gideon did not turn toward her. "What does that mean?" "It means your generator is running." She walked away before he could answer. That evening, Gideon met Nadine in her county office. He'd brought no accusations, only numbers copied from legitimate service readings. Fuel use, amperage, heating load, building dimensions, and the location of the third circuit. Nadine filled 3 pages of her cobalt notebook. "If the hidden area is housing animals," she said, "utility consumption may help establish occupancy. It does not prove ownership or mistreatment." "I know." "Food deliveries?" "Higher than the visible kennel count would require." "Can you document that lawfully?" "Not yet." Nadine closed the notebook. "Then do not steal an invoice to make my job easier." "I was not planning to." She gave him a look that suggested planning was not the only concern. "I will compare registered dog numbers, feed purchases, wastewater permits, and utility records. Quietly." Gideon returned to the workshop after dark. Bishop was waiting near the stove. The dog pushed himself upright as Gideon entered, steadied on 3 legs, and crossed several feet of concrete. His body swayed once. Gideon instinctively reached out. Bishop stopped and looked at the offered hand. Then he took another step without it. Gideon lowered his arm. The dog reached him, touched his nose to Gideon's coat, and returned to the blanket as though nothing important had happened. It was the first time Bishop had chosen movement over assistance. Gideon stood alone in the warm workshop and understood that helping did not always mean taking weight away. Sometimes it meant refusing to look away while someone carried it themselves. The knock came after 9. Wesley Dunn stood outside beneath the workshop light. He was shorter than Gideon remembered, or perhaps time had compressed him. His right leg remained stiff, and he supported himself with an ashwood cane whose handle bore shallow tooth marks. His hair had thinned to silver brown across the top, and cold had reddened his broad face. For nearly 30 years, Gideon had rehearsed what he might say if they stood this close again. None of it survived. "Wesley." "I did not come for an apology." Gideon stepped aside. "Then come in for the heat." Wesley entered and noticed Bishop immediately. The anger in his face shifted, though it did not disappear. "I heard they took the leg." "Yes." Wesley rested both hands on his cane. "My dog went missing in November. German Shepherd. Marlowe." Gideon waited. "Had a white patch across the chest, not common. I saw something through the ventilation slats of a Northridge truck 2 weeks after he disappeared." "You reported it?" "To Emmett. Driver had paperwork. Said the dog came from a breeder in Montana. I had no plate, no clear picture." "You believed him?" "I wanted to." The answer carried shame rather than uncertainty. Wesley looked toward Bishop. "I told myself grief was making every shepherd look like Marlowe." Bishop rose. He moved slowly toward Wesley, the remaining rear leg adjusting beneath him. Halfway across the floor, his paw slipped. Wesley shifted as if to help. Gideon did not. Bishop recovered his balance and continued until he stood beside the cane. He sniffed the carved handle, found the old tooth marks, and placed his head against Wesley's knee. Wesley's face tightened. "Marlowe did that," he said. Gideon said nothing. Wesley lowered one hand onto Bishop's neck. The gesture did not erase 30 years. It did, however, make room for the next minute. "I still do not forgive you," Wesley said. "I know. But if Northridge took Marlowe, I want the truth." "So do I." "That is not the same as us being friends." "No." Wesley nodded once. "Good." After he left, Gideon returned to Curtis's old paper files. Near midnight, he found an original utility blueprint dated 12 years earlier. The paper was yellowed and marked with Curtis's handwritten service notes. The current drawing showed a solid wall beneath the feed warehouse. The old one did not. A narrow staircase descended from a maintenance door at the rear of the building into a lower service corridor. Beside it, in faded pencil, Curtis had written, "Sublevel access, heating and drainage." On the updated plan, the staircase, corridor, and door had been removed. Not closed. Removed from the record. Gideon laid both versions side by side beneath the workshop lamp. Across the room, Bishop slept with his head resting on his front paws. Northridge had not simply hidden dogs behind a locked door. It had erased the door first. By the 6th week of Bishop's recovery, the snow around Timberline Crossing had hardened into layers. Fresh powder covered old ice. Tire tracks froze overnight and remained stamped into the roads for days. Every route through the valley seemed to preserve evidence of where someone had been, even when no one wanted to explain why. Bishop's progress was less visible. Lenora had fitted him with a temporary prosthetic made of black composite, a dull metal joint and a rubber foot shaped to grip winter ground. He tolerated it for 7 minutes the first day, 5 the next, and less than 3 on the morning he threw himself onto the clinic mat and refused to move. "He is not failing," Lenora said. Gideon stood with the support harness in one hand. "He is refusing. Those are not the same thing." Bishop lay with his head on his front paws, watching them discuss him as if both humans had become medically disappointing. Lenora adjusted her silver stopwatch. "The socket feels strange. His weight distribution changes. His remaining hip is compensating. You cannot argue him into trusting a piece of equipment." "I am not arguing." "You have been staring at it like an officer waiting for a confession." Gideon put the harness down. Bishop's eyes followed the movement. 5 minutes tomorrow?" Gideon asked. 3. And while he is still succeeding. The advice stayed with him longer than he expected. Gideon had spent much of his life believing endurance meant continuing until the task was finished. Bishop was teaching him that stopping before damage could also be discipline. Outside the clinic, Wesley waited beside his farm truck. Their arrangement had formed without friendship. Wesley watched Northridge transport routes. Gideon compared what he found with service records Curtis still possessed. Nadine handled anything that crossed into official investigation. They met, exchanged facts, and avoided the past unless it forced itself into the room. Wesley unfolded a road map across the truck hood. 3 enclosed vehicles in 12 days, he said. None followed the direct highway route. His ash wood cane rested against the fender. Cold reddened his hands, but he refused gloves when handling paper. He marked 3 dates with a pencil. 1 left during the founder's dinner. 1 during the county plow auction. The last moved while the sheriff's office was handling that wreck near Kavanaugh Pass. Different drivers? Could not tell. Same vehicle? 2 looked the same. White box bodies, rear ventilation, mud over the plates. Gideon compared the dates with Northridge's public training calendar. All 3 happened when local attention was elsewhere. Wesley gave him a flat look. That is generally why I marked them. The edge in his voice no longer surprised Gideon. It was not cruelty. It was a boundary Wesley rebuilt each time their work began to resemble partnership. Gideon folded the map. You should stop sitting alone in that hunting cabin after dark. You giving orders now? No. Sounded like one. The roof leans. So do I. Wesley took back the map. For a second, Gideon nearly said that 1 collapse had already been enough between them. He let the sentence die before it became another badly shaped apology. Nadine's investigation had also begun producing a pattern, though not the kind that could yet open doors. She invited Gideon to the county office late one afternoon and spread 9 microchip reports across a conference table. Beside them lay printouts from private registries, breeder records, and 3 companies with names designed to reveal nothing: Summit Protective Assets, Western Field Response, and Highline Security Partners. 4 of the missing shepherds reappeared in private databases, she said. Alive? Registered. That is not what I asked. No, it is what I can prove. 1 dog reported missing in Idaho had been entered 6 weeks later as a trained patrol animal belonging to a security contractor in Nevada. Another had been reclassified as breeder stock in Wyoming. A third appeared under a new name with the same birth date but a changed ownership chain. The alterations were careful. Not perfect, but dispersed across different jurisdictions and private registries. Can you connect Northridge? Gideon asked. Not directly. The transfers pass through intermediaries. Some records use scanned signatures, some use breeders that have since closed. Someone changed the histories. Yes. Is that enough for a warrant? No. The answer struck harder because Nadine did not soften it. We have suspicious utility use, hidden architectural access, missing dogs, and altered registrations. Enough to justify continued inquiry. Not enough to search every building on private property. Gideon looked at the papers. By the time it is enough, the dogs may be gone. That is possible. You say that easily. No. Nadine closed 1 folder. I say it accurately. Her steel-colored eyes held his. Accuracy is what keeps the evidence usable after urgency passes. He understood the principle. Understanding did not make it easier to obey. 2 nights later, a message appeared on the prepaid phone Nadine had advised him to use for confidential contacts. Mile 18, rest area, 11:30, come alone. No name. Gideon knew who had sent it. The rest area had been closed since a rock slide damaged the access road years earlier. Its picnic shelters stood beneath snow-heavy firs, and an empty restroom building faced a frozen overlook above the valley. Tamsin Greer waited beneath the broken roof of the largest shelter. Her gray-blue work coat was zipped to her throat. The wine-colored cap hid most of her uneven hair. She wore no red gloves,
Her bare hands were shoved beneath her arms for warmth. "You were followed?" she asked. "No." "You checked?" "Yes." "That does not mean you would see them." "Then why ask?" Tamsin looked toward the road. Because fear had become a habit, Gideon realized, not a momentary response, a way of occupying space. She handed him a folded packet sealed inside a grocery bag. Gideon did not take it. "What is this?" "Partial transport schedule, codes, dates, holding numbers, not names." "How did you get it?" "I print the driver sheets." "You said you only coordinated vehicles." "I lied." The honesty did not improve his trust. Snow loosened from a branch and struck the shelter roof with a dull slide. Tamsin flinched before catching herself. "Harlan knew about Bishop before you reached town," she said. Gideon's attention narrowed. "How?" "Military adoption announcements, contractor forums, working dog people watch those things. A decorated shepherd, intact bloodline, retired to a handler with no family around him. He was not for sale." To Harlan, that was a paperwork problem. Tamsin explained that Bishop's service history made him valuable, not as a patrol dog but as breeding stock. Northridge could market future litters as descending from a proven military canine, charging far more than ordinary kennel prices. Harlan had prepared forms suggesting Gideon voluntarily transferred Bishop for behavioral rehabilitation. Afterward, the public record would show that the dog died from complications related to age and prior service injuries. "And the cage?" Gideon asked. Her mouth tightened. "It was supposed to catch him alive." The original trap had been a reinforced transport cage concealed near the lower fence, baited with meat and fitted with a remote drop door. Tamsin had found the work order and damaged the locking catch so Bishop could push his way out. "One of Harlan's men tested it," she said. "He realized someone had altered it." "Rusk?" She did not answer. "He replaced it with the cable?" "Yes." Gideon stepped closer. Tamsin did not move back. "You knew." "I knew they changed the plan. I did not know what they used until I followed the service road." "You were there." Her face seemed to lose what little color the cold had left in it. "I heard him." The words were almost nothing. That made them worse. Tamsin had reached the trees while Bishop was still fighting the cable. She tried to release the mechanism, but he smelled Northridge on her clothing and panicked. When she touched the trapped leg, he twisted and pulled harder. The red strap found near the trap had torn from her tool pouch. "You could have called me," Gideon said. "Yes." "You could have called the clinic." "Yes." "You left him." "Yes." No excuse followed. The restraint in Gideon broke so quietly that he did not notice until his hand closed around the front of her coat. He drove her backward against the shelter post. Tamsin's breath caught. She did not resist. "You left him in the snow." "I know." "For hours." "I know." Gideon saw Bishop on the ground again, the blood, the impossible angle of the leg, the dog looking at him with faith while he worked a release that could not restore what had already been destroyed. His fist tightened in Tamsin's coat. Then his thumb touched the braided cord around his own wrist. Green and brown strands. A gift from a man who had once told him that anger felt useful right before it made every decision smaller. Gideon let go. Tamsin remained against the post, breathing hard. "You should turn me in," she said. "I might. You should. But not before you tell me everything." The statement sounded practical. It was not. It was the first compromise Gideon had made with the truth. Tamsin placed the packet on the picnic table. The hidden sublevel held dogs that Northridge could not place in public kennels. Some had been stolen from rural properties. Others came from failing breeders who accepted cash and signed blank transfer forms. A few had been collected as supposed strays and given new identities. The strongest were pushed through accelerated obedience and protection drills. Those that broke down were moved, hidden, or removed from the books. "How long have you known?" Gideon asked. 6 months. And before that? I thought the paperwork was sloppy. Then I got promoted and saw the roots. What did you do? Delayed 2 shipments, switched 1 identification band, marked a female as medically unsuitable so she went to a legitimate rescue. 1 dog. 1 I could move without exposing the rest. Tamsin's tone sharpened for the first time. You think courage arrives fully built? It does not. Sometimes it is 1 forged signature and 3 months of vomiting before work. Harlan held documents bearing her signature. If the operation collapsed, he could claim Tamsin had created the false transport chain on her own. Her criminal record made the story easy to sell. She tapped the packet. This is not enough to clear me. No. It may be enough to show where the vehicles go next. Gideon took it. Before leaving, Tamsin said, "There is another transfer coming, bigger than the others." When? I do not know yet. Find out. She gave him a tired, bitter look. You sound exactly like a man who still believes orders protect him from responsibility. Then she walked into the dark. The next morning, Gideon met Nadine in the back room of Maribel's shop. He disclosed the planned capture of Bishop, the forged transfer concept, the hidden dogs, and the partial transport schedule. He did not disclose that Tamsin had sabotaged the cage, witnessed Bishop in the cable, or fled without calling for help. Nadine read the pages in silence. Your source handled these directly? Yes. Is your source involved in the operation? Yes. How deeply? Gideon held her gaze. I do not know yet. It was not entirely false. That made it easier to say and harder to justify. Nadine copied the schedule but left the original with him. If this person participated in crimes, hiding that may compromise everything they provide. I understand. Do you? Yes. Nadine closed her cobalt notebook. I hope so. Gideon carried the warning home. That evening, Tamsin came to the workshop to identify codes on older service records. Maribel remained nearby as a witness, seated at a bench repairing a harness with her brass shears within reach. Bishop lay beside the stove without his prosthetic. The moment Tamsin entered, his head lifted. She stopped just inside the door. Gideon had not warned her that Bishop would be there. Perhaps that was cruel. Perhaps he wanted one witness who could not be managed by language. Bishop pushed himself upright. He crossed the workshop slowly on 3 legs, shoulders shifting to compensate. Tamsin's hands remained open at her sides. He approached within a foot, sniffed her left hand, then the right. His nose moved toward the cuff of her coat, where old machine oil and kennel disinfectant still lived beneath the cold air. Bishop stepped backward. For one long moment, he looked at her. Then he turned away and returned to Gideon without accepting her touch. Tamsin stared at the floor. He remembers. Gideon rested his hand near Bishop's shoulder. Yes. He should hate me. That is not mine to decide for him. Tamsin nodded once. It was not forgiveness. It was more honest than forgiveness would have been. Near midnight, Nadine called. Her voice was controlled but faster than usual. She had matched 2 route codes from Tamsin's pages to reserved commercial loading windows and out-of-state security transfers. Northridge had scheduled an unusually large vehicle convoy. When? Gideon asked. Within 7 days, possibly sooner if weather changes. How many dogs? We cannot know. But enough to clear the lower level. A pause. Yes. Bishop stood near the window, his reflection dark against the snow outside. Nadine continued. If they move before we establish legal cause to stop them, those dogs will scatter across multiple states under new records. Gideon looked at the packet on his workbench. For weeks, the case had been a structure assembled from small, careful measurements. Now someone had placed a clock inside it. Nadine built the case on a folding table in the back room of the County Animal Control Office. The table had been meant for vaccination clinics and adoption paperwork. Now it held utility records, veterinary files, transport photographs, microchip reports, and copies of service diagrams Curtis had carried in beneath his coat, as though paper could feel shame. Nothing on the table proved the whole crime. Together, the pieces began to make silence look organized. Nadine stood at one end with her cobalt notebook open beside a laptop. She had divided the evidence into columns: animals, property, transport, medical records, financial influence, and witness reliability. Gideon noticed that last category. "Tamsin is not reliable enough yet," Nadine said without looking up. "She gave us the route codes. She also participated in the operation, and you still have not told me exactly how much." The words were calm. That made them difficult to evade. "I told you what affects the transport investigation. That is not the same as telling me everything." Gideon felt the wooden ruler in his coat pocket pressing against his ribs when he leaned forward. Across the room, Lenora sat beneath a bulletin board crowded with lost dog notices. Her silver stopwatch rested unopened beside a stack of medical charts. She had spent 4 nights reviewing every German Shepherd Northridge had brought to her clinic over the previous 3 years. The results were arranged in front of her: broken premolars, torn nail beds, narrow burns under neck fur, strained hips inconsistent with the ages recorded. Dehydration repeated often enough to become a method rather than an accident. In 7 cases, Northridge had supplied nearly identical explanations using different names: training resistance, kennel agitation, transport stress. Lenora removed her reading glasses. "I signed 6 of these without requesting independent follow-up." Nadine looked toward her. "Were the injuries concealed from you?" "Not all of them." "Were the explanations medically possible?" "Yes." "Were they medically persuasive?" Lenora's jaw tightened. "No." No one rushed to comfort her. That was not what the room was for. "I have prepared a self-report for the State Veterinary Board," Lenora continued. "Incomplete documentation, failure to escalate suspected mistreatment, and conflict created by my county contract." Gideon turned toward her. "You could lose your license." "For a time." "The clinic is the only full-service animal facility within 40 miles. "Yes." "Then why do it now?" Lenora folded her hands over the charts. "Because usefulness does not excuse dishonesty. It only makes dishonesty easier to defend." The answer settled into Gideon more deeply than he wanted. Curtis cleared his throat. His contribution occupied the largest folder on the table. 12 years of invoices, electrical readings, furnace repairs, generator inspections, drainage maps, and handwritten amendments. The old blueprint showing the lower service corridor was included, along with later drawings where the corridor had vanished. "I certified the updated plan," Curtis said. Nadine looked up. "Did you know the sublevel remained in use?" "I knew the heating line remained active." "That was not my question." Curtis stared at the tabletop. "No. But I also never verified that it had been sealed." "Why?" He gave a humorless breath. "Because Northridge paid on time." He slid 3 utility summaries forward. The hidden circuit drew enough power to heat and ventilate an occupied kennel larger than the registered building capacity. Seasonal spikes matched several of Wesley's observed transport dates. Curtis had also found charges for industrial air filtration and replacement floor drains in a structure officially classified as dry storage. "If Harlan learns I gave you this," he said, "my company is finished." Nadine did not offer reassurance she could not guarantee. "Do your employees know?" "One does. The others will know when the work stops coming." Curtis rubbed his thumb across a crack in the table. "My wife used to say a business is just a promise made to people who need groceries. I thought keeping Northridge meant keeping that promise." "And now?" Gideon asked. Curtis looked at the hidden circuit diagram. "Now I think I made the promise too small." Wesley arrived last. He brought a spiral notebook, 2 memory cards, and a sealed envelope containing the original statement he had made after seeing a dog resembling Marlowe through the slats of a Northridge vehicle. Emmett had marked the report as unverified owner identification and taken no further action. Wesley placed the document in front of Nadine. "He told me grief made people see what they wanted." "Did you believe him?" she asked. "For about 20 minutes. "Then why did you let it go?" Wesley rested both hands on the carved head of his cane. "Because arguing with a deputy would not bring Marlowe back. Because Northridge bought feed from me. Because I had debt. Pick whichever answer makes me look least disappointing." Nadine did not choose. Instead, she reviewed the photographs Wesley had taken from public roads. None showed a clear plate, but they established that Northridge vehicles repeatedly used indirect routes on nights when no lawful transfer appeared in the company records. A gas station camera filled part of the gap. Nadine had obtained the footage through the owner, who initially insisted the system deleted recordings after 30 days. When she mentioned a possible animal welfare inquiry, he remembered an off-site archive maintained by the fuel company. The video showed 2 Northridge box trucks purchasing diesel after midnight on 3 dates Wesley had recorded. On each occasion, the official transport log showed no active vehicle. One driver used a company fuel card tied to a Shell contractor. The evidence still did not justify a full criminal search of the property. It did, however, justify more than suspicion. By late afternoon, the folding table had become a map of all the ways ordinary people taught themselves not to see. Gideon had wanted the town divided cleanly. Harlan on one side, everyone else on the other. The truth refused to cooperate. The feed supplier who suspected unregistered dogs had also employed 5 local families through winter. The clerk who processed altered kennel permits believed the discrepancies were harmless administrative shortcuts. The gas station owner kept archived video but lied about it because Northridge bought thousands of gallons of fuel each year. Lenora had accepted plausible medical explanations. Curtis had ignored a heated sublevel. Wesley had allowed himself to doubt what he saw. None of them had ordered a dog restrained, shocked, starved, or renamed. Each had made one smaller decision that allowed the next decision to remain possible. Gideon left the office after sunset and found Emmett Crowley waiting near his truck. The deputy wore no hat despite the cold. Snow collected in his thinning hair and melted along the collar of his uniform jacket. "We need to talk," Emmett said. "Then talk to Nadine." "I came to talk to you." Gideon opened the truck door but did not climb inside. Emmett glanced toward the animal control building. "You have people pulling old reports." "Yes." "You have Wesley turning in road photographs." "Yes." "You are putting together a story that makes it look like I protected Harlan." "Did you?" Emmett's mouth tightened. "There was no envelope of cash, no secret meeting, no order to falsify a report." "That was not my question." For several seconds, only the wind moved between them. Then Emmett looked toward the dark mountains. "My wife had surgery 2 years ago. Complications. Insurance denied part of the rehabilitation."
Gideon waited. A community medical fund covered it. Anonymous donor. Northridge. I learned that later. And after you learned? Emmett pushed his hands into his coat pockets. Harlan never asked me for anything. He never had to. The confession arrived without drama. Emmett had understood that Northridge could support families the county could not help. He also understood that challenging Harlan might close the door for the next person who needed money. So he treated complaints as isolated incidents. He accepted clean paperwork. He postponed sending Bishop's trap for laboratory examination because the regional unit already had a backlog and because urgency would have required explaining why the case mattered.
You let gratitude decide what evidence deserved attention, Gideon said. I kept a business dispute from becoming a witch hunt. A dog lost a leg. And you have spent 30 years acting like leaving town made you different from the man who put Wesley in a hospital. The blow landed exactly where Emmett intended. Gideon stepped closer. Emmett did not retreat. You think I do not know what cowardice looks like? Gideon asked. I think you only recognize it when someone else is wearing it. For one moment, Gideon hated him. Then Wesley's name settled between them. Gideon had left because staying would have required facing what he had done. He had called it enlistment, discipline, service, necessity, anything except fear. Emmett had stayed and renamed his own fear responsibility. The choices were not equal, but they had grown from similar soil. That does not excuse you, Gideon said. No. It does not excuse me either. Emmett looked at him then, surprised less by the words than by the absence of attack behind them. He removed a key from his pocket. The trap is still in evidence storage. It was supposed to be sent out. It was not. Send it tonight. Emmett held Gideon's gaze. Then he nodded once. It was not redemption. It was merely the first correct action taken too late. The next morning, Nadine submitted an application for a limited animal welfare inspection. She did not request authority to search Harlan's office, seize financial records, or enter every locked structure. The evidence was not yet sufficient for that. She requested access to inspect registered and suspected kennel areas, verify microchip records, examine heating and ventilation systems, and assess whether animals were being held in unsafe conditions. The county attorney warned that Northridge would challenge the scope. Nadine revised the application twice. By noon, a judge authorized the inspection for the following morning. The order gave them a door. Not the whole building, just enough to look through. Gideon received the news in Lenora's clinic while Bishop stood between two low rails wearing the temporary prosthetic. The dog managed 4 controlled steps. On the 5th, the rubber foot twisted slightly and Bishop stopped. Gideon expected him to collapse or resist. Instead, Bishop looked back at Lenora. She clicked the stopwatch. That is enough. Gideon reached for the harness. Bishop remained standing. For the first time, stopping did not look like defeat. It looked like choice. Lenora removed the prosthetic and examined the skin beneath the socket. Nadine called, Gideon said. Inspection tomorrow. I know. You sound worried. I am. Because of the dogs? Because frightened people destroy evidence. Frightened men with money move faster. Her concern proved justified. At 4:17 that afternoon, Northridge canceled 2 public training sessions. At 5:02, a fuel vendor received an urgent request to top off 3 transport vehicles. At 5:40, Curtis saw a remote monitoring alert showing that the heating load beneath the feed warehouse had dropped sharply. Not failed. Dropped by command. Tamshin contacted Gideon shortly after 6. The message contained no greeting. Transfer moved up. High-value dogs leaving tonight. Auxiliary kennel heat off.
Mountain route blocked. They are waiting for another truck. A second message followed. Sick ones still below. Gideon called Nadine. She answered on the first ring. I have the messages, he said. Forward them. They cut the heat. We need confirmation. Curtis has remote system data. Send that too. How long? I am contacting the judge and state police now. How long, Nadine? I will not invent an answer to calm you. The old frustration rose in him, but there was no time to feed it.
He called Curtis, then Lenora, then Wesley. At the workshop, Gideon pulled on his dark green parka and packed a flashlight, insulated gloves, the wooden ruler, a compact medical pouch, and the service keys Curtis had legally issued him for emergency maintenance calls. Bishop watched from beside the stove. You are staying here, Gideon said. Bishop rose. No. The dog crossed the workshop toward the door without the prosthetic, balancing carefully on 3 legs. Gideon stepped in front of him. This is not a patrol. Bishop shifted right. Gideon blocked him again. The dog did not growl. He simply pressed his nose against Gideon's coat, then looked toward the truck. When Lenora arrived, snow clinging to her barn coat, she understood the disagreement immediately. Absolutely not. He will stay in the vehicle. No. He will not enter the building. No. He knows the dog's there. That is an emotional theory, not medical justification. Bishop stood between them, breathing steadily. Lenora examined his posture, the healed stump and the remaining hind leg. He cannot be exposed to cold for long. He cannot run. He cannot jump. He cannot be used to provoke a reaction or guide anyone. Agreed. He stays in a heated vehicle with me or a technician. Agreed. If he shows fatigue, pain, agitation, or attempts to leave the safe area, I take him home. Gideon nodded. Lenora pointed one gloved finger at him. And you do not reinterpret any of those conditions because the moment feels important. I understand. I am not convinced you do. Bishop moved past them and stopped at the truck ramp. Gideon looked at him. For weeks, he had seen the missing leg before he saw the rest of the dog. He had mistaken protection for deciding which parts of Bishop's life were over. This was not a return to duty. It was not revenge. Bishop could not rescue the dogs below Northridge by force, scent, or obedience. But he knew what it meant to wake in a body altered by another person's choice. He knew the sound of metal, the smell of those halls, and the fear of losing control over where he was taken. Gideon opened the truck door. Bishop climbed the short ramp slowly, using 3 legs and refusing the hand Gideon held nearby. By the time Gideon started the engine, Nadine called again. The judge had expanded the inspection into an emergency welfare response based on the heating data and the imminent movement of animals. State police were being dispatched. Animal transport vehicles were on the way. No one had authority yet to search for the entire criminal operation. They did have authority to prevent animals from freezing. Outside, the winter sky remained clear, bright with stars and reflected snow. The road shone beneath the headlights. Behind Gideon, Bishop lay on a padded blanket in the heated cab, alert but still. Ahead, beyond the northern ridge, Northridge Working Dogs was preparing to move the dogs it could sell and abandon the ones it could not. The town had survived for years by learning not to ask what happened behind those fences. Tonight, a question had finally become an emergency. The moon made Northridge impossible to hide. It hung above the valley in a cloudless sky, whitening the training fields, the roofs, and every line of fencing around the property. Snow reflected the security lights until the entire compound looked overexposed, stripped of the shadows that might have softened what happened there. Gideon arrived behind Curtis's service truck. The convoy had formed quickly, but not chaotically. Nadine led in a county animal control vehicle. 2 state police cruisers followed,
then Lenora's heated veterinary transport, and a larger van equipped with collapsible crates, blankets, oxygen, and emergency fluids. Maribel came last in an old flatbed, carrying a portable generator. She had used her place in the winter emergency network to call 2 tow operators, 3 trained livestock volunteers, and a retired kennel worker who knew how to move frightened dogs without turning fear into injury. No one had come to witness a confrontation. They had come because living animals were getting colder by the minute. Bishop lay on a padded platform inside Lenora's vehicle. He wore his charcoal support harness, but not the temporary prosthetic. The metal joint became too cold, too quickly outdoors, and Lenora had refused to allow it near frozen ground. When Gideon opened the side door, Bishop raised his head. "Stay with Dr. Vale." The dog looked past him toward Northridge. Even from the parking area, the compound carried familiar smells: bleach, diesel, damp concrete, stressed animals. Bishop's nostrils moved once. Then he lowered his chin, but did not relax. Lenora stood behind him with a medical bag slung over one shoulder. "You have 10 minutes before I reconsider bringing him." "I heard you the first 4 times. I repeat myself when people pretend agreement is the same as obedience." Maribel passed with a coil of extension cable. "She does it because it works." Nadine gathered everyone near the main gate. She wore a reflective vest over her navy coat and held the emergency welfare order inside a clear, weatherproof sleeve. Beside her stood State Sergeant Elias Boone, a lean man in his early 50s, whose calm voice seemed built to keep other people from making unnecessary movements. "We are entering under emergency authority to assess animals at immediate risk," Nadine said. "This is not an unrestricted criminal search. Photograph conditions as found. Do not open desks, offices, personal vehicles, or unrelated storage without additional cause." Her eyes found Gideon. "You are here as technical support. You do not pursue anyone. You do not question employees. You touch only systems Curtis identifies as part of the heating, power, ventilation, or access controls." "Understood." She held his gaze for another second. Perhaps she was still thinking about everything he had not told her. At the gatehouse, 2 Northridge employees stood behind locked glass doors. One was Rusk, his heavy neck rising above a Navy company jacket. The other held a phone to his ear and kept glancing toward the rear buildings. Nadine presented the order through the intercom. Rusk did not open the gate. "Our legal counsel is reviewing it," he said. "Animals may be held in unsafe temperatures. We require immediate access to the registered kennel areas and suspected auxiliary holding space." "You have no proof animals are in the auxiliary structure?" Curtis held up a handheld thermal monitor. The rear warehouse wall showed a broad blue section on the display, several degrees colder than the outside-facing kennels. "There is supposed to be active heat behind that wall," he said. Rusk's expression changed. Only slightly. "Enough." Nadine spoke into the intercom again. "You have 30 seconds to open the gate voluntarily." The phone in Rusk's hand lit up. He looked at the screen, then turned away from the glass. The gate remained closed. Sergeant Boone nodded to a trooper near the cruiser. Bolt cutters came out, but Curtis stopped him. "Do not cut the chain. That gate is magnetically locked. Damage the wrong conduit and the whole system may default closed." He pointed toward a utility cabinet beside the stone entrance pillar. "Gideon." The access panel had been sealed with a numbered maintenance tag. Curtis photographed it before breaking the seal. Gideon removed the cover and found a backup relay tied to the facility's central controller. Someone inside had activated a lockdown override. He traced the low-voltage lines by flashlight, separated the gate circuit from the alarm loop, and bypassed the magnetic hold without killing power to the entire compound. The gate slid open 6 inches, stopped, then continued. No one cheered.
Nadine walked through first. An alarm began before the convoy reached the rear buildings. It was not the sharp pulse of a fire system. The sound rose and fell in a narrow mechanical wail, painful rather than informative. Dogs answered from multiple directions. Barking erupted across the visible kennel row. From beneath the feed warehouse came a heavier sound, dozens of paws striking metal and concrete at once. Curtis looked toward the utility building. That is not tied to the fire panel. Gideon heard something above the alarm, a thin electronic whistle near the upper edge of hearing, training frequency, the kind designed to provoke attention or discomfort. "He is using the conditioning system," Gideon said. Nadine radioed the state officers. "Locate the control source. No forced entry outside emergency scope unless necessary to stop harm." Rusk emerged from the gatehouse. "You are upsetting the animals," he shouted. "This is exactly why untrained people cannot enter." Nadine did not raise her voice. "Turn off the alarm." "I do not control it. Who does?" Rusk looked toward the administrative building. One office window was lit. Harlan was inside. Curtis led Gideon around the feed warehouse to a service entrance. The electronic lock showed power, but rejected both maintenance codes. Through the metal door came barking, claws, and the repeated impact of bodies against kennel fronts. The thermal meter showed the interior temperature continuing to drop. "Backup generator should be automatic," Curtis said. "It has been isolated. Can you restore it?" "If the fuel line is open." They crossed to the generator enclosure. Someone had closed the manual fuel valve and removed the handle. Gideon pulled the wooden folding ruler from his pocket, opened 2 sections, and used its burned metal edge to measure the square valve stem. 1/2 inch. Curtis handed him an adjustable wrench. Gideon opened the valve slowly. Fuel moved through the line. Curtis primed the system while Gideon reset the emergency transfer controller. The generator started on the 3rd attempt. Its engine shook the enclosure, then settled into a deep, reliable rhythm. Lights returned in the service corridor. Heat did not. "Damper controls are still closed," Curtis said. Gideon studied the panel. The underground zone had been separated from the main building management system. Its dampers were controlled locally from inside. "We need access." Nadine arrived as he said it. "Can you establish immediate danger?" Curtis showed her the temperature data and the inactive airflow indicators. "If animals are below, ventilation is minimal and heat is off." Nadine turned to Sergeant Boone. "We have direct evidence of unsafe environmental conditions and active refusal of access. Open it." The trooper used a hydraulic spreader on the service door frame. Metal bent inward with a sharp groan. The moment the seal broke, warm, stale air did not come out. Cold did. It carried urine, wet fur, disinfectant, and the sour odor of prolonged fear. A concrete stairway descended beneath the warehouse. The door Gideon had found on the old blueprint existed after all. At the bottom, steel kennel fronts lined a corridor wider than the drawing suggested. Dogs crowded behind them, German shepherds in black, sable, and gold, some standing, some crouched, some throwing themselves at the doors whenever the alarm changed pitch. Several wore no collars. Others had plastic identification bands with handwritten numbers. Not names, numbers. Lenora came down with 2 veterinary technicians and stopped halfway along the corridor. Her face went still. "Those nearest the outer wall first," she said. "Check gum color, paws, temperature, respiration. Do not open more than 1 run at a time." Nadine began documenting the corridor on video. "This entire area is unregistered," she said for the record. "Multiple live animals present, heating disabled, high-frequency training equipment active." A young shepherd struck the kennel door hard enough to bloody his muzzle. Another spun repeatedly in a tight circle. The noise made careful movement nearly impossible. Gideon looked toward the stairwell. Bishop could not remain in the corridor. Lenora had been clear.
But the dog did not need to enter it. "Bring the transport van to the service door," Gideon said. Lenora understood his intent and rejected it immediately. 5 minutes. He stays outside the threshold. If the sound agitates him, we stop. If any dog redirects toward him, we stop. Agreed. She muttered something about agreements made under duress, then went upstairs. Bishop came down only as far as the sheltered loading platform outside the open service door. Gideon supported him with the harness handle, while Lenora stayed on the other side. The alarm continued. Bishop's body tightened when the metallic sound struck its highest point. Gideon crouched beside him. He did not command him to search, advance, or perform. He used the old grounding phrase from engineering convoys, spoken slowly and evenly. "Hold steady, breathe, stay with me." Bishop planted his 3 feet. His ears remained forward, but he did not bark. Gideon repeated the phrase. The nearest dogs could not understand the words. They understood rhythm. They understood that one dog stood near the open door without lunging, retreating, or answering panic with panic. A female shepherd closest to the platform stopped striking the bars. Her barking dropped to a low whine. A second dog turned toward Bishop instead of the alarm. The change moved no farther than the first few runs, but it was enough. Lenora's team opened one kennel, then another. Slip leads were placed. Blankets covered shaking bodies. Animals too weak to walk were transferred onto rigid boards. Bishop swayed once. Lenora touched Gideon's arm. "Done." Gideon did not bargain. He guided Bishop back into the heated van. That obedience cost him more than entering the corridor would have. When he returned below, a side gate at the far end opened from the inside. Tamsin stood behind it. Her wine-colored cap was gone. Uneven dark hair clung to her forehead, and one sleeve of her gray-blue coat had been torn. She carried a binder, a set of vehicle keys, and a small external drive. Rusk shouted from the stairs, "Do not listen to her! She set this up!" Tamsin walked past him. "I altered transport records," she said to Nadine. "I delayed shipments, changed identification bands, and signed false manifests. I also know which companies received the dogs." Nadine kept the camera running. "Are you making this statement voluntarily?" "Yes." "You may be exposing yourself to criminal charges." "I know." She handed over the binder and keys. "Harlan moved 6 dogs into Transport 2. The remaining kennel records are on the drive. Biocodes are inside the front cover." Nadine passed the materials to a trooper for immediate logging. Then she turned Tamsin toward the wall and placed her in temporary custody. Tamsin did not protest. Gideon watched from the corridor. Part of him had imagined this moment differently. Tamsin opening the door, saving the dogs, becoming something cleaner than the person who had fled from Bishop in the snow. Instead, she was searched, cautioned, and escorted upstairs while the dogs continued crying around her. That was more honest. A crash sounded from the transport yard. One of the enclosed box trucks had struck a snowbank while attempting to reverse toward the side road. Its rear wheels spun, throwing dirty snow against the loading dock. Harlan was driving. Through the windshield, his carefully controlled face had broken into something narrow and furious. The truck turned toward the service exit. A state police cruiser blocked the road. Harlan accelerated anyway, then stopped when a second cruiser closed behind him. He stepped out with both hands visible before officers reached the cab. "This is an unlawful seizure," he said. "Those animals are under contract and being moved for their own protection." Nadine approached with the emergency order. "Open the rear compartment." "My attorney, open it." A trooper used the keys Tamsin had surrendered. 6 German shepherds were inside, secured in individual transport crates. 2 crates carried microchip numbers that did not match the paper manifests clipped to their doors. A third dog had a county missing animal record under another name. Inside the cab, officers found active route data, messages with coded buyers, fuel authorizations tied to a shell company, and a destination outside Idaho. The evidence did not emerge in one dramatic revelation. It accumulated. False transfers, altered chips, unregistered kennels, food purchases for more dogs than Northridge declared, high-frequency devices mounted along the underground corridor.
Electric contact collars.
The disconnected heating system. A red leather tool strap matching the fragment recovered near Bishop's trap. Emmett Crowley arrived before midnight. He parked outside the open gate and walked in carrying the sealed evidence container that held the cable mechanism. No one had summoned him. He found Nadine near the transport yard. "I failed to send this for examination," he said. "I also narrowed the original report despite evidence of entry onto private land." Nadine accepted the container without relieving him of the statement. "You will provide a recorded account." "Yes." "You may require counsel, I know." Emmett looked once toward Gideon. There was no request for understanding in his face, only exhaustion. Harlan was placed in a state police vehicle shortly afterward. As officers led him past the service building, he saw Gideon near the veterinary vans. "You think this town will thank you?" Harlan asked. Gideon looked toward the dogs being carried out under blankets. "No. You have no idea what closes when I close. That is not the same as what you opened." Harlan's expression tightened, waiting for anger, threat, or triumph. Gideon gave him none. A technician called for help with a weakened female shepherd whose rear legs would not support her. Gideon turned away from Harlan. He carried the dog to the transport van with one arm beneath her chest and the other supporting her hips. She smelled of cold metal and old straw. Beneath the blanket, her body weighed almost nothing. At the open gate, Maribel organized volunteers into a line. Blankets passed inward. Empty crates passed outward. Warm water, medical supplies, identification tags, and portable heaters moved from hand to hand. Curtis worked beside two of his employees to restore airflow through the underground corridor. Wesley stood near the loading ramp, recording every dog transferred and checking each temporary number twice. Some people from town arrived because Maribel had called them. Others came because the lights and police vehicles could be seen from the highway. They did not all know the whole truth. They did not all understand their part in allowing it. But for that night, no one stood with hands in pockets pretending the fence made what happened inside someone else's responsibility. Near dawn, the final dog was lifted into a heated vehicle. The underground corridor fell quiet. Gideon returned to Lenora's van. Bishop was awake beneath a blanket, watching the open gate through the window. Gideon sat beside him and rested one hand against the pale crescent of fur beneath his throat. Outside, the moon faded above the ridge. Northridge no longer looked clean beneath the bright winter sky. It looked exposed. For the first time, the fence around it had not opened because Harlan ordered it. It had opened because someone inside finally chose the dogs over the locks. Truth did not save Timberline Crossing. It arrived too late for that. What truth did was remove the excuses people had used to explain why nothing could change. Afterward, the town was left with damaged businesses, frightened dogs, criminal charges, unpaid bills, and the uncomfortable knowledge that silence had never been neutral. Northridge working dogs remained behind locked state fencing through the spring. The blue sign at the entrance was covered by an evidence notice. Snow melted around the empty training fields, revealing worn paths between buildings and deep tire ruts near the transport yard. Without handlers calling commands or trucks passing through the gate, the property seemed larger and less important. Harlan Voss was charged with unlawful animal transport, falsification of ownership records, conspiracy, obstruction, and multiple counts of cruelty. His attorneys describe Northridge as a legitimate business undermined by disloyal employees and an unstable former soldier with a personal grievance. They describe Tamsin as the architect of the false transport system. They describe the hidden kennel as temporary overflow space. They describe the disabled heat as a mechanical emergency. Each explanation failed alone. Together, they revealed how many explanations a lie required to survive. The investigation also reached Harlan's younger sister, Corinne Voss. Corinne was 50, with carefully cut blonde-gray hair and the restrained manner of someone who preferred numbers because numbers did not ask why. She had managed Northridge's payroll, outside contracts, and 3 companies that existed mostly as addresses, signatures, and bank accounts. She had never entered the underground kennel, according to her statement. She had never handled a shock collar. She had never loaded a frightened dog into a truck. She had, however, split payments across false training agreements, created duplicate invoices, and moved money through shell companies after transport dates. When investigators asked whether she knew what the payments represented, Corinne said she had been responsible for accounting, not operations. Nadine later repeated the answer to Gideon without comment. He understood why. It sounded too much like the language the whole town had used. Not my building, not my dog, not my decision. Tamsin Greer accepted a plea agreement after months of interviews. Her cooperation helped identify buyers in 4 states, recover 2 additional dogs, and establish that Harlan had planned to falsify Bishop's death after taking him. It also confirmed that she had signed fraudulent manifests and left Bishop injured in the snow rather than expose herself. The prosecutor considered both truths. Tamsin was not cleared. She was sentenced to supervised probation, community service under an approved animal welfare program, and a suspended jail term dependent on continued cooperation. Gideon attended the hearing, but did not speak on her behalf. Afterward, Tamsin found him outside the courthouse. She wore a plain black coat and no red gloves. Wind pulled at the short, uneven hair around her face. "You could have asked for prison," she said. "It was not my sentence to choose. You could have told them I deserved worse. You already did." She looked toward Bishop, who stood beside Gideon in his support harness. The dog watched her but did not approach. Tamsin nodded once. That was all any of them were given. Emmett Crowley resigned before the county completed its disciplinary review. He testified about the delayed trap examination, the narrowed complaints, and the indirect financial influence Northridge had exercised through its community fund. He was not charged with taking a bribe, because no direct exchange could be proven. That distinction mattered legally. It mattered less to the people whose reports he had allowed to disappear into filing cabinets. Lenora's veterinary license was suspended for 90 days. The board found that she had failed to document patterns of suspicious injury and allowed a county contract to influence her judgment. During the suspension, another clinic covered emergencies twice a week from 40 miles away. People complained about the inconvenience. Lenora accepted every complaint without defending herself. She spent the 90 days cleaning unused rooms at the temporary state kennel and writing new reporting protocols for working dog injuries. Curtis lost Northridge within 24 hours of the raid. 2 other clients canceled after Harlan's supporters called Bellamy Mechanical politically unreliable. Curtis sold 1 service truck, released his youngest employee with 6 weeks of severance, and came close to closing the business before the following summer. He never said he regretted handing over the records. He did begin measuring every decision by what it cost. Wesley's feed contract disappeared as well. For several months, he transported hay for neighboring counties and slept in his truck between deliveries. He and Gideon worked together when a job required 2 people, though neither called the arrangement friendship. Some mornings they repaired equipment without discussing anything except measurements. On others, Wesley's anger returned without warning. One afternoon, while they were rebuilding a hydraulic lift, He set down a wrench and said, "What you did at Northridge does not erase what you did to me." Gideon kept his hands on the metal frame. "I know. You always say that. Because it is still true." Wesley's jaw tightened. "You left me here to become the story people told about your worst night." Gideon looked at him then. "I know that too." The apology he had rehearsed for 30 years would have explained fear, shame, enlistment, and the belief that becoming useful somewhere else might repair what he had ruined at home. None of it would give Wesley back an undamaged leg. "I was sorry from far away," Gideon said. "That made it easier for me, and useless to you." Wesley stared at him for a long time. Then he picked up the wrench. It was not forgiveness, but he stayed until the lift worked. Gideon's own conduct was reviewed after Nadine learned the full extent of Tamshin's involvement in Bishop's injury. He had withheld material information about a witness and copied part of a Northridge technical diagram before receiving explicit permission from Curtis. Neither act led to criminal charges, but both gave Harlan's attorneys grounds to challenge his reliability. A county reserve position Gideon had quietly considered was denied. The written notice praised his military record and cited concerns regarding judgment, evidence handling, and adherence to investigative boundaries. He folded the letter once and placed it in a drawer. Maribel found it there while searching for a drill bit. "You wanted the position?" she asked. "I thought I might." "Do you still?" "No." "That answer come before or after they rejected you?" Gideon looked at her. Maribel put the letter back. "Just making sure the truth is doing its job." The town did not reward him for helping expose Northridge. Some residents blamed Harlan, others blamed the state. Many blamed Gideon because he remained visible while the legal process stayed distant. The diner stopped serving him for 2 months after the owner's brother lost his kennel job. A hardware clerk refused his account. Someone painted "Traitor" across the workshop door in black spray paint. Gideon left the word there for 3 days before sanding it away. Bishop watched him work. "You disagree?" Gideon asked. The dog lay in the winter sun with his prosthetic beside him and offered no opinion. By autumn, the Northridge property was still tied up in court. The State Animal Welfare Fund rented part of the kennel complex to house dogs that could not yet be placed. Temporary staff worked under external supervision. Every microchip was scanned twice. Every medical examination required independent documentation. Nothing moved quickly. That was deliberate. Nearly a year after the raid, the court-approved sale of the property. A regional nonprofit purchased the land using private donations, state grants, and restitution payments connected to the case. The new organization was named Clearwater Working Dog Recovery Center, after the creek running along the eastern edge of the property. Gideon was offered a seat on the governing board. He declined. He had spent enough of his life believing that doing one necessary thing qualified him to decide everything afterward. The center was instead overseen by a veterinarian from Boise, an animal welfare attorney, 2 community representatives, and a retired search dog trainer with no financial ties to Timberline Crossing. Gideon accepted a smaller role. A neglected utility shed beside the main kennel became his workshop. He repaired support frames, built adjustable feeding stands, modified transport ramps, and designed low-cost carts for dogs with damaged hips or missing limbs. His father's folding ruler remained in the front pocket of his leather apron. Maribel made padded harnesses and custom straps from the shop in town. Curtis was hired to rebuild the heating system under a contract that required third-party inspection. Wesley drove the recovery van 3 days a week. Lenora returned after her suspension and worked under mandatory review, signing each medical record beside a second veterinarian for the first 6 months. No one called the arrangement redemption. It was work. Bishop became the first permanent resident. He never returned to formal service. He did not demonstrate obedience for visitors or wear a polished canine patch. On most days, he moved through the center on 3 legs, using the prosthetic only for longer, controlled walks. His value there was quieter. Newly arrived dogs often refused to leave transport crates. Some flattened themselves against the rear wall when a person approached. Others barked until their voices weakened. Bishop never entered the crates. He lay several feet away and waited. Sometimes that changed nothing. Sometimes, after 10 minutes or an hour, a nose appeared at the opening. Bishop would lift his head, look once, and remain where he was. He had learned the difference between invitation and pressure because his own body had taught it to him. On the first anniversary of the raid, Gideon drove him to the frozen lake behind the Rourke house. The morning was bright and windless. Snow lay clean over the repaired fence. Sunlight turned the ice silver blue and cast the pine shadows in long bars across the shore. Bishop wore no prosthetic. He stepped into the snow, lowered his head, and began moving faster than Gideon expected. Not a full run, a 3-legged rhythm that looked awkward only if compared with the dog he had once been. For several yards, it worked. Then his remaining rear paw slipped. Bishop rolled onto his shoulder and sent a powder of snow across his muzzle. Gideon moved before thinking, 1 step. Then he stopped. Bishop lay still. The old fear rose in Gideon, the instinct to lift, correct, carry, prevent. Bishop planted his front paws. His body twisted. For a moment the angle looked impossible. Then he stood. Snow clung to the pale crescent beneath his throat. He shook once, sneezed, and continued toward the lake as though falling had been information rather than defeat. Gideon laughed. The sound surprised him. Across the valley, a bell rang from Clearwater. One clear note, then another. The signal for an arriving transport. Bishop heard it and turned. A white recovery van was moving along the road toward the center. Its sides carried ventilation panels, but the doors bore the Clearwater emblem and a line of smaller words. Safe arrival. Documented care. No hidden transfers. A year earlier, the sight of an enclosed truck had made Bishop rigid. Now he watched until it passed the trees. Then he looked back at Gideon. The past had not vanished. Bishop still stiffened at certain metal sounds. Gideon still woke some nights remembering blood on untouched snow. Wesley still walked with a cane. Tamshin still carried a sentence. Lenora's records still contained signatures she wished she had questioned sooner. Recovery had not returned any of them to an earlier form. That was not what recovery meant. It meant the missing part no longer controlled every direction they could move. Bishop waited near the path. Gideon crossed the snow toward him. Together, they left the lake and headed back toward Clearwater, where a new dog was arriving, frightened, injured, and still uncertain whether an open door could be trusted. Bishop moved ahead on 3 legs. This time, Gideon did not hurry to catch him. Sometimes the greatest wrong is not the cruelty we commit, but the suffering we choose not to question. Timberline crossing began to change only when ordinary people stopped protecting their comfort and accepted the cost of telling the truth. Gideon could not restore Bishop's missing leg, and no one could erase the years of silence. But they could choose what happened next. In our own lives, courage may begin with one honest question, one difficult confession, or one decision not to look away. May God give us the strength to recognize what is right, and the humility to act before silence becomes part of the harm. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe if you would like to hear more stories about loyalty, truth, and the choices that shape who we become. May you have the courage to open the right door when the moment comes.